question of the next question, in fact, which is the third question of the speaking section. Do you remember how many questions we said we have in the speaking? Does anyone remember? We have 4 different questions, right? In the speaking section, we did question 1, the independent one, where they ask your opinion on something. We also did question 2, where you first read the letter, then you listen to the conversation. And finally, well, not finally, but second to last, we'll be doing the third question, okay? It's also an integrated task. So do you guys have any questions before we start today's class?
No, miss.
Okay. So this third question is very similar to the second in terms of the format. What you guys have to do is exactly the same as in the second. That means that first you have to read a short text. You have the same time to read. You have 45 seconds to read it. Then you need to listen to a lecture in this case. You listen to this audio file. It's no longer a conversation, it's a lecture, but you listen to it for 1 minute approximately. And then you get the question. You get the same amount of time for preparing and for speaking. 30 seconds to prepare, 60 seconds to speak. So in terms of format, it is exactly the same as the second question. First, you read for 45 seconds, you listen to the audio file, you get the question, 30 seconds to prepare, 60 to speak. Okay, guys, that's the format, exactly the same as what we did for question 2. Is that okay so far? Any questions about the format?
No, miss.
Okay, now what changes is the topic, the content. Unfortunately, this is no longer going to be as casual as question 2. The vocabulary could be a little bit more advanced, but it's still very, very approachable, I would say. In this case, you will be reading an academic passage. You will be reading an academic text, something that you could find in a textbook, and you will be listening to a lecture. Do you guys remember what a lecture was? Can anyone tell me? What's a lecture?
Exposición.
Exactly. Yes, it's like the explanation of a topic, a presentation of a topic. In this case, we're hearing university lectures. So we're listening to university classes. So that's what you will hear. And then the question is going to ask you to join the both of them. So you have to talk about both of them in a way that we'll explain later. But that's what you will read and you will hear. So let's see an example so that you guys get the idea better. This is the text that you would get. The first tip and the most important tip, as soon as you guys get the text, the first thing that you will see is the title. It even comes like earlier. You have the title like maybe 2 seconds before you get the text. So as soon as you guys see the title, the first thing that you need to do, it has to be kind of like a reflex, is write down the title on your notes. Just the way it is, you write it down. So in this case, I want you all to write behavior modification in your notes. First thing you do as soon as you get the text, write down the title. Now, after you have the title in your notes, you start reading the text. And when you're reading, you're looking actively for one specific thing. There's just one thing that you really care about. There's just one important thing in the text that you need to find, and that is the definition of this concept that you found here. So in this text, they will be talking about different things, but there's always going to be one sentence or one phrase that contains the definition of this concept. So one sentence or one phrase in this text explains what behavior modification is in a summarized way. So I want you guys to please read the text, and I want you to identify that phrase or sentence and tell me which one it is. Where do you find the definition of the topic here? Okay, guys? So I'll give you some seconds to read. Let me know when you're done. Okay, guys. So what is behavior modification according to this text? Where is the definition?
Could be the last sentence. Behavior based on what they have learned about the consequence of the behavior.
Exactly it. Well done, Luis. So yes, it says behavior modification occurs when individuals change their behavior based on what they have learned about the consequences of that behavior. Exactly. So behavior modification happens when a person changes his or her behavior based on what you have learned about the consequences of that behavior. Exactly it. So the next and most important thing that you have to do when you're reading this is to find the definition and take notes about that. So obviously you don't have to write everything down, but some keywords that will help you remember the definition, you can always summarize it, right? You can maybe say, when people change their behavior based on their learnings, or based on what they have learned about the consequences, or based on experience, maybe, I don't know. You can paraphrase it, you can summarize it a bit, as long as you don't lose the actual meaning of the of the idea, okay, of the definition. Is that okay so far? Everything else is not important. So, I mean, you need to read it, but you don't have to write any notes about that. And don't pay too much attention. Just focus on finding the definition and writing it down because you will need to mention it. Okay, guys? Is that okay so far?
Yes, miss.
After that, after the 45 seconds are over and you've already read the text, found the definition and the title, you need to listen to the lecture. Now, in this lecture, what you guys will find is the professor, the person who speaks, we're going to call him or her professor because it's a university teacher. So the professor will be giving you guys real life examples of how you see this concept in action, how you see behavior modification in real life. Now, you may have one or two examples, it depends. When you have psychology, you usually have just one. This is a psychology, by the way. You just have one example. And the examples could be different. We're going to see these with examples. I don't want to bomb you with the theory, but we're going to learn that with examples. But the thing is that you will have examples, or you will have one example in psychology, sorry. What you need to do is take notes. You only get to listen to the lecture once, and you need to focus on finding the relevant information. Now, how do you know what the relevant information is? You already know the concept. You already know that behavior modification is when people change their behavior based on what they learn about the consequences of their behavior. So you have to be looking for information that relates to the concept. So you're looking for the example of one person, of one group of people that modified or that changed his or her behavior based on what they have learned about the consequences of that behavior. So you need to look for the details of what behavior it was, how did this person learn, how did they change their behavior, information that's directly related to that concept, okay? That's why I always say that the first step to having a correct answer is understanding really well the concept. Because if you understand the concept, you're going to more likely understand better the lecture as well. Okay, guys, so I just want you to take notes. Please get ready to take notes. I'm going to play the lecture and listen for the example of behavior modification. Okay, then we will discuss. Is that okay so far? Any questions before we hear it?
No, miss.
Okay, let's go there.
Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic in a psychology class. This happens all the time with kids in schools. Say there's a little boy or girl who's just starting school. Well, they're not really used to the rules about proper behavior for a classroom. So at the beginning they might, I don't know, interrupt the teacher, walk around the classroom when they're supposed to be sitting down. Just misbehaving in general. Okay, but what happens? Well, the teacher gets angry with them when they act this way. They might get punished. They have to sit at their desks when everyone else is allowed to go outside and play. and they certainly don't like that. Soon, they'll learn that this kind of behavior gets them in trouble. They'll also learn that when they raise their hand to talk to the teacher and sit quietly and pay attention during class, they're rewarded. The teacher tells them she's proud of them and maybe puts little happy face stickers on their homework. Now that their behavior gets a good reaction from the teacher, the kids learn to always act this way in class and not behave the way they used to.
All right. So, can you guys summarize the example or the lecture for me? What was the example?
The behavior of kids in a classroom.
Exactly. And what does the professor say about that?
He only talk when he raised the hand. I think.
The kids.
And no one, they can touch the things of the professors. I don't understand well.
Okay, good. But I want you to tell me how that example relates to the concept that we have of behavior modification. Remember, this was the definition, right? So how does that example relate to this concept? Okay, guys, this is a transcript of the lecture. So you already know the concept we said. Luis is right. This example is about kids. The context of this example, it's like a general example, and it is about kids or children in class, in the classroom. So they say it's about kids in schools. They say in the beginning, initially, when kids are new, they don't know the rules, right? They're not used to the rules. So they start misbehaving. Initially, kids misbehave in school. How do they misbehave? Like what you were saying, right? So they talk when they're not supposed to, they don't raise their hand, they walk around the classroom, so they misbehave. Now, as a result of that, the teacher gets angry and they get punished, right? They receive punishment from the teacher for their misbehavior. Now, what happens is that they also see that when they behave properly, when they raise their hand, when they behave well, the way that they should, the teacher rewards them. So they are rewarded. Now, all of this leads the students to learn that when they behave well, they get rewarded. So what they do is they change their behavior. They change their original behavior, their original misbehavior. They modify it based on the teacher's reaction. Based on what they have learned are the consequences of their behavior, right? Based on what the teacher does when they act that way. So they learn to always act this way, and they don't behave the way they used to. They have changed their behavior. That is the most important part from the example, right? To show how these kids have changed their behavior from misbehaving to behaving well in the class based on what they have seen and they have learned. The teacher's reactions are to their behavior, right? So based on what they have learned, the consequences of their behavior are. That is how this example is related to the concept. That's the most important information. The details are never going to be that important. So you really don't have to focus on explaining things in detail. You need to go for the big ideas, because when you guys are speaking, you won't have a lot of time and you need to put everything together. So you need to summarize a lot and focus on the relevant part. So that's why I told you, understand very well the definition so that then you're looking for specific information. When you have the definition in mind, you know, let's say in this case, you know that you're looking for specific individuals, kids, that change their behavior. What behavior? Their behavior in class, based on what they have learned about the consequences of that behavior. The consequences could be good or bad, And the consequences are the teacher's reactions, right? Whether reward or punishment. So you're looking for specific information, and that's going to be the important information. Okay, guys? Is that okay? Do you have any questions about the listening part? Okay, I'm glad. Now, what exactly do you have to do? Here's the question. So, Alejandro, could you please read the question? Hang on a second, please. Okay, can you please read the question, Alejandro?
Wait, miss. Using the example from the lecture, explain what behavior modification is and how it works.
Thank you. So, as you can see, it's different because they are not asking you to summarize. They are not like summarize the lecture and summarize the reading. They don't want you to do that. The question is very clear. They want you to explain behavior modification, explain the concept, but don't explain it with the concept. Don't explain it with just words. Explain the concept with the example that the professor gave to you. So it's very interesting because you have to join the ideas and you have to show the connection between it. That makes this question a little bit hard. And that's why some students have told me that this could be the hardest question because it requires drawing that connection. Okay, guys, the other questions are more simple in that sense. The next question is just listening. So you don't have to join in listening with anything. Okay, but this specific question requires for you to pay specific attention to the content, to look and classify the information relevant and irrelevant. Okay? Now, what exactly do you guys have to do for this question? We are going to be using a template. This is a template. And remember that we have 60 seconds to speak. So during these 60 seconds, during the first 10 seconds, only 10, you guys will have a short introduction. 10 seconds, 1/6 of your response. And in the introduction, what I want you guys to do, and be very careful, is mention the title that you have in your notes, which is the topic, and mention the definition that you also have in your notes, right? You need to make sure that this is as summarized, as fast, as concise, as clear as it can be. Don't waste your time in the introduction. Please don't, because that's probably the number one mistake students make, right? Make it fast. In this case, we could say, according to the passage, behavior modification occurs when individuals change their behavior based on experience. That's it. That is your introduction. 10 seconds, more than enough. Okay, guys? Any questions so far? Is that okay? All right. Now we have 50 seconds to explain the topic, explain that definition that you gave using the example. So you need a brief transition where you say, in the lecture, the professor gives the example of, and then you go on explaining the example. You need to focus on the relevant information again, use a couple of transition words here and there, and that's about it. You don't have to do anything else. You do not need a conclusion, but in case you have extra time, you can go with one, and you could say something like, in summary, this is a glaring example of behavior modification. If you have extra time. If you don't, no conclusion is actually needed. Okay, guys? What do you think now? I'm sure you must have some questions, or is everything clear really?
It's clear.
Okay. So yes, I would say it's just about practicing. We are going to be looking at different topics and different structures. But let's see, I'm going to give you guys a sample response. I will try using the timer so that you can see how I manage my time, what information I exclude, what information I do mention, and whatever you want to see. You already know how this section is evaluated, right? You know that you should be looking for the content, the delivery, the grammar and vocabulary, and everything else. So let's see. Okay, this is 1 minute. According to the passage, behavior modification occurs when people change their behavior based on experience. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of kids in the classroom. He explains that initially, kids, when they are new, they don't know the rules of the classroom. As a result, they may start misbehaving. Therefore, the professor or the teacher usually gets angry and punishes the student. On the other hand, when a kid behaves properly in class, for example, they can raise their hand, they can sit quietly, the teacher rewards the kid. As a result, they learn how to behave properly in class and they modify their initial behavior so that they get a good reaction from the teacher. They change their misbehavior and replace it with a positive behavior based on what they've learned about the consequences of their behavior. Right? So that was my explanation of the concept. I didn't focus on the details, I focused on the big ideas. I tried to use transition words. On the other hand, however, as a result, therefore, I try to speak calmly. I usually speak slower when I am doing these things than when I normally speak, because I try to avoid making mistakes. You know, that's the goal. So it's not to speak fast, it's to be concise, to be clear, to articulate correctly. I actually had a short introduction. A short conclusion, but it wasn't the one in the example, right? I repeated the definition in the end because I thought it was a good way to like connect the ideas even more. I said, well, these kids have learned and have modified their initial misbehavior in order to get a good reaction from the teacher, right? Be based on what they've learned about the teacher's reactions. So I am trying to connect the information that I got from the reading to the one that I got from the listening. So those are some things you guys can do, but at the end of the day, it's not that complicated. It's just about, I would say the most important skill here is to be able to summarize well. Because if you don't summarize well, you're going to focus on the details and you're going to run out of time. But it's not really rocket science. I think you guys can totally do that. So is it okay now?
Yes, miss.
Okay, guys. Now, another amazing thing about this question is that we already know what topics you guys can find in the question. 90% of the time, you guys will have one of these three: psychology, biology, or business. We've already seen psychology. Psychology is the one we just did. You know, it talks about how our brain works, how we learn, how we interact with each other, how our memory works, how we experience certain things, how we deal with emotions and stuff. Biology focuses always on animals or plants. It's never going to be human biology, it's always animals or plants. And it talks about the way that they have evolved, the way that they have adapted to certain changes, different life processes, the way they relate to each other and stuff, the way they survive, the way they catch food, that type of thing. Business is like regular business, marketing techniques, pricing, advertising strategies, attracting customers, diversifying, expanding your business, growing your business, that type. And obviously, there's a small chance that you can have something different. So you can have art, history, sociology, geology, literature. Those are some examples, but you can have other things as well. But this is very, very uncommon. I don't think you guys will have one of these. But don't worry, because it's still the same structure, and we will practice in that. Okay, guys? But those are the three main topics that you get in this question. Now, why am I telling you this? How is this important? Why do you care? I don't know if you notice, but you need some specific vocabulary, right? What happened if you didn't know what behavior was? So everything, you will be a little bit lost, you know, if you didn't know the word behavior and everything's about behavior, you're like, so what is behavior? So you need to know some vocabulary related to these topics. If you get a biology and you don't know what prey is or what a predator is, then you'll be a little bit lost if you have something like that. If you have a business topic and you don't know how to use the word, let's say, diversifying, maybe it could be a problem if it's about that. So my suggestion is read and consume and watch or listen to content about these topics. For psychology, for example, you can watch like TED Talks, TED Education, read scientific reports. For biology, you can watch National Geographic, Scientific American, or read scientific articles. For business, plenty of podcasts available, plenty of videos on YouTube, many materials available for business. There's even one section of English that is business English. So it's something very easy to find. Okay, guys, I really highly recommend that you guys check out some material so that you expand your vocabulary in those areas. Is that okay so far? Any questions about this? So we've done psychology. Let's do business and biology now so that you guys get to see one of each. And tomorrow we'll be practicing either way. So it should be fine. Okay, guys. So let's do this one here. The idea will be the same. Now I will give you 45 seconds to read this text. Remember, first thing you do, you copy the title and then you search for the definition. Okay, guys? So please, you may begin reading now.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a marketing class. Nowadays, something you notice more and more is television commercials that are made specifically for certain television programs. So, let's say a company wants to sell a cell phone. Now, during TV shows that young people watch, shows with pop music or teen serials, they create a commercial that emphasizes how fun the phone is. The phone has bright colors and they show kids having a good time with their friends. And, well, the company wants the kids watching TV at this time to want to buy this phone that's made especially for them. But the same company will make a different commercial to be shown during, say, a program about business or a business news show. Now, for this group of people, business people, the company will have to show how efficient their phone is, how it can handle all business easily, and maybe even save money. And here's the thing. It's basically the same phone. The company has just made two different commercials to appeal to different groups of people.
Okay, guys. So, using the professor's examples, explain the advertising technique of target marketing. Now you will have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, guys. So, is there anyone who would like to try by any chance? Who would like to go first?
Me, yes.
Okay, Luis, great. Do you have a template pen?
Yes, miss.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead then.
According to the passage, target marketing is defined as a strategy to a very specific audience. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of a phone commercial. He explains that they made two different commercials, one for young people and shows the fun things about the cell phone, and to all people commercial is how is affecting the cell phone. In a summary, this glaring example of target marketing and how effective is reaching potential customers.
Okay, Luis, perfect. Really well done. To be honest, I would say so. It was an amazing first try to be your first try. I'm really surprised. Well done. I mean, starting from your introduction, the fact that you didn't over-explain the concept, the content, you had the correct concept, strategy of advertising to a smaller audience or to reaching potential customers. And the way that you summarized the example was really great because you didn't focus on the details. Instead, you went for the big ideas. There was a phone commercial made, two different commercials made for two different audiences, for two different groups of people. One for young people, which emphasized how fun the phone was, and the other one for business people, which emphasized how effective the phone was, right? Not all people, but business people. So great. I would say was nearly a perfect response. Maybe I would add a couple of transition words. We could say, on one hand, the commercial that was shown to young people had this and this and that. On the other hand, maybe, right? So to separate the ideas a little bit. Remember the conclusion, this is a glaring example. But to be honest, I wouldn't change anything from your response. It was a great, well done. That's business. As you can see, nothing too complicated. The vocabulary is still really, I would say, really, I mean, not that complicated. We do have a few specific words. Maybe the word audience, maybe the word marketing is advertise. But in general, those are not very difficult words. Now let's do biology. It tends to be a little bit more difficult. Okay, but I want you guys to try. So it will be the same. You guys have now 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture from a biology class. There's a large tropical insect called the peanut bug. Yes, like the peanuts that you eat. And the peanut bug's front wings are colored so that they blend in with their surroundings. But its back wings, which are usually closed and hidden, have these bright, colorful spots on them. And when the peanut bug's attacked, it suddenly opens its back wings, and out pop these big bright colors. And that surprises the predator and gives the peanut bug a chance to get away. And then you have a butterfly called the morpho butterfly. And parts of the morpho butterfly's wings are very shiny. They reflect a lot of sunlight. When this butterfly is resting, this shiny part of its wings is hidden. Now, morpho butterflies are often attacked by birds. So when a bird approaches, the morpho flies away. And when the morpho flaps its wings, all the bird can see are flashes of light reflected from the morpho's wings. Those flashes of light make it very difficult for the bird to follow the morpho, and the morpho is usually able to get away.
Yeah. Using the examples from the peanut bag and the morpho butterfly, explain the concept of revealing coloration. Now you guys will have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So maybe Alejandro, do you want to try now? Are you there, Alejandro? Okay, maybe Luis. Do you mind going on this one too?
I don't have good notes, but I can try.
Okay, try your best with the information you have. Go ahead.
Okay, according to the passage, revealing coloration is defined as a strategy to confuse the predator and in, and can escape. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of the peanut butter and the morpho butterfly. He explains that the peanut bug will have hidden colors and he can escape the, I don't remember, but the morpho butterfly, when he opened his
Okay, good. So first, one tip that I can give you guys for grammar, when you encounter these biology questions, and if you have examples of animals or plants, is to always make them plural. So instead of saying the professor gives the example of the morpho butterfly, he explains that the morpho butterfly, when he opens his wings, careful because that's not the correct pronoun, right? For a butterfly, you would have to use it, and it's hard to remember that. So make it plural. The professor gives the example of the morpho butterflies when they open their wings. And so that way, every time that you use a pronoun, it's just they, them. So maybe you can do that, make it plural. Now, I noticed that, yes, maybe you were struggling a little bit, probably because of the vocabulary, I don't know, the content, but your introduction was good. You had the correct concept, although it took you a little bit longer than it should have. You had the correct idea. So the strategy to confuse the predators and escape. And you were starting good with the examples. My advice, my recommendation would be, if you really don't know anything, like let's say that you didn't understand really well the examples, improvise. You can say, for example, the professor gives the example of two different animals that make use of this strategy. The first example is of the peanut bag. He explains that this animal uses revealing coloration in order to get away and escape the predator and survive, right? What I said is exactly the same as what I said in the introduction. Even though I don't remember the details, I know that that's going to be the idea, because at the end of the day, this is an example of revealing coloration. So improvise, remember that they evaluate your response based on 3 different things: content, delivery, and grammar and vocabulary. So if you are not too good with content, maybe you didn't understand one part really well, then you need to make up for that with the other ones. You need to still speak, show that you're fluent, show that you can create good sentences, articulate them correct, pronounce them correctly, I don't know, intonate well, and show that you have good grammar and good vocabulary, right? And that is going to make up a little bit for the missing part of the content or the information if it's not too accurate, or if you're missing some details. It's okay, because at the end of the day, that's just 1 out of 3. Okay, so maybe those are some tips that I can give you. Careful with the grammar, the pronouns, make it always plural so that you don't get confused with the pronouns. And second, if you didn't understand something, improvise and use the information you have. Use the information even if you have to just paraphrase the definition once again. Okay? Okay, awesome. Let's do one more. We did psychology, biology, and we did business. So let's do something else that's not either of those, so that we get to see everything that could be in your test. Okay, let's do this one here. You guys will now have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture in an art history class. All right, so let's consider the work of the outsider artist Henry Darger. Darger lived by himself in a tiny apartment in Chicago in the 1900s. He had no friends and spent all his spare time there alone, creating hundreds of paintings and drawings. He had never formally studied art and kept his work completely private, so no one ever saw it or responded to it during his lifetime. And so when you see Darger's work, you notice how unique it is. It doesn't remind you of anything you've ever seen before. It's very much his own. For example, one piece, it's a watercolor painting. In this piece, he illustrates a story about the adventures of 7 children. But see, Darger had a really hard time drawing human figures, yet he managed to come up with his own rather unique solution for the problem. He simply cut out pictures of children from newspapers and magazines and pasted them into his own painted illustration of trees, flowers, and grass. The results look a little strange. Darger's picture looks more cluttered, more crowded with details than the pictures of other artists, because its entire surface is painted and there are no spaces left empty. It's also a lot longer than the pictures of most other artists, about 9 feet long.
Okay. Now the question says, explain why Henry Darger is considered as an outsider artist. You will now have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So who wants to go with this one? Does anyone want to try? Right, if you want, we can do it together. So what would you say the concept is in this case?
Outsider art.
Okay, outsider art. And what is outsider art?
It's when you live and work outside the society.
Exactly. So outsider art is the art that is made by someone who lives outside of society, who lives and works outside of society. So we would have to say, according to the reading passage, outsider art is the one that is made by an artist that lives and works outside of society. Now, in the lecture, the professor gives the example of Henry Dart, an outsider artist. So what does the professor say about Henry Dart?
He has a no conventional artistic technique, no conventional mode to create uh, artistic figures. I don't know.
Artistic works, yes.
Artistic work is.
Exactly, yeah. So first of all, he had no formal education. He had no formal method or techniques for his art. What else?
And he talks about how he works.
Okay. So yes, he works. He lives completely, or he lived in the past, right? He lived completely alone outside of society, like very far away from everybody else from the city. And he worked very differently than other artists. His works were very different as well. The professor gives the example of one specific painting or one specific work. How was this work?
He mentioned it's a little strange and he have a lot of details.
Exactly. So yes, professor gives the example of this specific painting, which looks very strange for the viewer. Why? It had a lot of details. The entire canvas was covered with different details. And for example, the professor mentioned that since he had no formal education and since he didn't really connect with other people much, he didn't know how to draw human figures. So, for example, what he did was he cut magazines, he cut figures of magazines, and he pasted them into the canvas instead of formally painting the figures, right? So when somebody sees this, it's a lot larger than normal paintings. It's completely covered, and it had these magazines, I mean, these pieces of magazines pasted there. So the result is very strange, right? Very different from normal. So yes, and that's why he is an outsider artist, right? Because he lived and he worked outside of from society, because he had no formal education, and because his art was very different from other artists' work. So based with that information, are you guys sure that you don't want to try? Just putting everything together?
Okay.
Okay, good. So please, Luis, you can start speaking now.
According to the passage outsider art, is defined as a person who lived and worked outside the society. And in the lecture, the professor gives example of Henry Darger. He explains he has a no conventional mode to create artworks, eh, because he has no friends and he create alone a lot of art and, and, and nobody seeing his work. He mentioned about one piece of art, and he mentioned it's a little bit strange because he has a lot of details. Mentioned about he got magazines and he improved in this art.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Luis. Great. I don't have any comments, but the grammar part. In this case, the example was in the past, but you started really well. Even though you were conjugating in the present, that's a great and acceptable way of telling a story. I don't know if you've ever heard, like maybe like when you see interviews of artists in TV shows, sometimes they're telling stories about the past, about past experiences, but they tell them in the simple present. So it's okay. But if you're going to use a simple present, you need to use it for everything and conjugate correctly. So yes, he lives outside of society. His work is very strange. He has no formal education. And at the end, you said he cut uh, parts of a magazine, he pasted them, or he put in the past. So careful. If you're going to use the simple present, it's fine, but every verb has to be conjugated in the same tense, right? Don't mix. Or you either use the simple present or you can also use the simple past, right? He had no formal education, he lived outside of society, his work was very unconventional, but don't mix the tenses. When you mix is when the error appears. Okay?
Yes.
Like that and some transitions. So what do you guys think? Now we've seen 4 different types of questions, 4 different topics. There's still lots to see because we have to see different types of examples. For example, in psychology, you have 3 different types of examples. So we're going to be seeing that and practicing with different types of questions tomorrow. But what do you guys think so far? What do you think about this question? Do you think it's easier, harder than the previous one?
It's a little bit harder.
Yeah, it may be a little bit harder. Yeah, it's more technical, more academic, but it's still, I mean, the thing is, it's about being lucky as well, because some questions are more difficult than others. But yes, it's a little bit harder in terms of the content, the vocabulary, the length as well than the previous one. Still not too difficult either. It's just about practice. Do you guys have any questions before we go today?
Yes.
Okay, guys, perfect. Then please, actually today we have to complete 2 surveys. So I'm sending you guys the first. And when you're done, I'll send the other one too. Please don't go yet. All right, that was fast. Thank you guys. I'm sending the other one as well. And after you're done, you can go. I will see you all then tomorrow in class. I hope you have a great night.
Maybe
Bye guys, take care.